You are listening to Able Radio, simplifying productivity for small business owners everywhere. If you are looking for 1% improvements that add up to big results, this is the place for you. Every week, we learn about simple systems and tools that will help you build the business and life you've always wanted. Now here's your host, Zachary Sexton.
Welcome to Able Business Radio. My name is Zachary Sexton, and today I have with me Lisette Sutherland. Welcome, Lisette.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. Ever since I found out about your podcast, Collaboration Superpowers, which is just a fun name, I've been digging in and learning more and more about what you do, which is you help other people work from anywhere online. You do this with workshops, you do this with online classes, and a weekly podcast that I've been enjoying very much that dives into the challenges as well as the opportunities of working with virtual teams. Really, thank you for coming on. This is something I've been working on virtual teams for about 4 years now. It's something that I'm not as an expert as you are because I haven't done hundreds of interviews like you have, but it's something that I know a lot about, and I just feel like the opportunity is growing for people, even if they want to just work from home one day a week in a normal and I've never heard this term before that you say co-located job, like it's a weird, oh yeah, I work at a co-location job.
Right.
So it's a new exciting territory that the communication tools that have been coming on have been allowing. So really, thank you so much for coming on. This is going to be exciting for me.
I hope so. I hope it'll be valuable information. Let's see if we can deliver something for the listeners.
Absolutely. My first question is, how did you get started in remote teams? What got you into this? What was your path that led you to where you're at right now, which is a teacher of how to be productive online?
About 15 years ago now, I worked for a guy who was building an online project management tool I was living in Los Angeles. And the reason why he was building this tool is because he didn't want to die. And he thought he was really frustrated.
Is this Peter Thiel?
No, it's not Peter Thiel, but in those circles, like I never knew Peter Thiel. I didn't know anybody famous there, but I did belong to this group. It was called Hike the Geek. And it was just a bunch of self-proclaimed geeks that went hiking every Sunday in Los Angeles, which, if people don't know, it is possible to walk and hike in Los Angeles. So you don't have to drive everywhere. So we would actually go hiking every Sunday. And this guy was sort of the leader of the group. And he was building this tool to get longevity scientists from all over the world to talk to each other and collaborate and share data so that they could solve this pesky problem of aging or not dying. So that was his goal, and I was so inspired. I don't know, it was just this aha moment for me. I remember sitting around in his living room after one of the hikes as we were talking about it, and he was explaining this vision, and I thought, oh my God, think of what we could do if we got the best people working together on some of these global problems. Like, we could cure cancer, we could solve global warming, like, I don't know, we could, you could just do anything. We could move mountains, and I got so excited by the idea that we no longer need to ask permission from government agencies or organizations to do anything. Like, we as a people can get together and move mountains if we want to, just by organizing ourselves online. And man, down the rabbit hole I went, and I never really looked back since. So I wasn't so excited about not dying, though I am very excited about longevity. I'm interested in that. That wasn't the thing, but it was really the idea behind it. I don't know, it just totally got me going.
So my follow-up was, why is this so important to you? But it seems like bringing together the best minds in the world to solve big problems is what gets you excited. Is there anything else about remote working that you love, you enjoy?
Well, I mean, personally, I really like the freedom. I think everybody that is into remote working loves the freedom. But for me, it was that I spent tons of years working in cubicles and open offices and feeling miserable and not really understanding why. And the reason why, I think, is because in order to do good work, need a quiet place where I can kind of hunker down by myself with a million sticky notes and move things around and think. And these cubicle open office environments were just killing for me. Like, I just can't focus. So I'm an extrovert. I love being around people, but I really need to, in order to be productive, I really need to be on my own.
Man, we might be wired pretty similarly. I've had a similar experience, and also with the sticky notes. And I understand you listened to the Jim Benson episode and are thinking about your own personal Kanban now.
Oh man, what you can't see right here is on my floor. I have a huge board that, because I listened to the Jim Benson episode to prepare for you, I was just like, oh my God, brilliant, of course. And I've talked to Jim Benson before. I've heard what he said before, but for some reason when I was listening to that episode, it really struck me like, oh my God, I need to visualize my work. And the most important thing about visualizing your work, as a quick tangent, was seeing how much you get done. Because I have a to-do list that I use online. I use Toodle-Do just because I've been using it for ages and ages. There's no, it's not like it's the best or anything, but it does what I need and I'm used to it. But you cross something off your list and then it leaves your list. And then all you're left with is the things that you still have to do on the list. So it feels like you're on this endless treadmill of things that you still have left to do. And when I heard Jim talk about, well, actually, it's really important to visualize what you've done or to be able to see how much you've accomplished, I thought, oh, that's what's missing. Because I really felt like I was on this endless treadmill all the time. There's always more to do. There's always something on your to-do list that you're not getting done. So anyway, thank you for referring me back to that episode, because it was a great tip for me.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I've got a million sticky notes over here on the ground.
Perfect. I actually just set up a little automation in my Trello board that takes my done list. So Trello is a project management tool that's very visual. That's very akin to sticky notes. You've got lists, cards, and boards. And I set up an automation using this application called Butler that takes all of the things that I've finished that week and puts it on another board where I can start to analyze the work. So this week, I actually, right before our call, I moved my cards into a few different lists. Either I loved it, hated it, or was neutral. So there's only one thing I hated, and the neutral and loved it list were about the same size. And then I found one card, and they're like, oh, I could make this little improvement. So I'm always looking to make just a 5-second improvement on my work. And I noticed that setting up that separate board allowed me to see, man, I really did get a lot of stuff done, and most of the stuff I did enjoy doing, and here's some things I didn't enjoy doing. Here's how I can fix that. Oh, that's great. So, I'm a big fan of Kanban, which is just Japanese for signal cards. It's all about seeing your work. When you see your work, you have more awareness, and when you have more awareness, you have more control. So it's really cool. We'll make sure to put that episode in the show notes. So
well, and it also relates back to remote teams, if I can interrupt really quick, which is I always recommend people work out loud on remote teams. So that means making your work visible to other people so that that other people know what you're working on, because you don't have context and you don't know what each other are doing. But if you make your work visible to people, then they know what you're doing, and it really helps create a connection on the team.
Yes.
So in fact, I had a team meeting today with somebody on the Happy Melly team. I'm a remote office manager for this team, and there's 11 of us on the team. And one of the tools we use is I Done This, which is like a Facebook-style news feed for what you've accomplished that day. And some of the people on the team are really bad at filling out I Done This. And what happens is not only do we not know what they're doing, but there is a sense of unfairness that some people are doing more than other people, and they're getting paid the same, and it causes resentment. So it's really important to visualize the work, whether you're alone or whether you're working on a team.
Yeah. Well, then hopefully you don't go on that other end of the spectrum, which I know I do personally, is you did something like, oh, emptied the dishwasher. I'm going to write empty dishwasher. Check that off the list. Look at you, Zach. So making sure that it's right. Actually work that needed to be done, not just kind of filler work. But that's actually just the topic of this whole show is
you don't want to spam people with unimportant stuff. Yeah. You want to, there's definitely a balance there. But for the most part, if you want to visualize your major tasks, yeah.
And we'll end this tangent now, because actually the focus, you've got so many focuses when it comes to online work. A big thing that you do in your workshop, you've got team agreements and ways to simulate the office, and ways to have feedback, and I'm sure there's some things that you talk in there when it comes to project management. I actually think Trello and the Kanban method and potentially Agile or Scrum are amazing ways to to have teams communicate effectively. But another way that teams communicate effectively is with face-to-face meetings. And I don't always leave the video on, but you mentioned in your podcast and other materials that there's an importance of being able to look at people and to see people when it comes to online meetings. What are some other tips or maybe basic principles people should be aware of if they want to have successful meetings online?
Some of these are going to sound super basic, but I've done enough workshops to know that they're not being implemented in most places. But the first thing I would say is you got to have rockin' internet. If you don't have rockin' internet, everything starts to fail, and online meetings suck with people that don't have rockin' internet. So whatever you have to pay, whatever your company has to pay to get a really good internet connection, you got to do that. It's not always possible. I have a colleague in South Sudan. She simply can't get internet, but when you can, yeah.
My virtual assistant, Debbie, is in the Philippines, and often it's good. Sometimes it's not. And you're right, those meetings are super frustrating when we're like restarting Skype every couple of minutes. What do you recommend for people who have teams that they're not just in a location that they can't get higher bandwidth internet?
Well, I'd say stop using Skype. It's probably the tool that uses the most bandwidth out of any video conference tool. So yeah, absolutely. The best tool that I found so far is Zoom, zoom.us. The second best after that would be BlueJeans. Those are the two fabulous video conferencing tools where Skype won't work, Zoom will work. I worked with a guy in Berlin who was in East Berlin, who we were organizing a conference together. Skype didn't work, Zoom works. It's because of the way it's set up, and I don't understand the mechanics behind it, but it uses a different way of projecting the video, and Zoom is way, way better. So for people who are using Skype or Skype for Business, just chuck it in the river.
Right, all right.
That's my advice.
That's very interesting. I've got some podcasting questions to talk to you about offline because we're using Skype right now. And I actually pay for the Zoom platform. I use my group coaching. We did everything in Zoom. I'm starting to do webinars, weekly Trello webinars in Zoom. And I love the platform. I just assumed Skype was a little bit lighter weight or easier to use. So that's good to know. Debbie and I might be zooming it up coming soon.
Yeah. That would be my recommendation.
Cool.
And the other thing for online meetings is get some decent equipment. You don't need to have the fancy mics like you and I have, but like a decent headset. It costs $50, 50 euros even. I mean, depending on the headset that you're getting and where you are, but a great headset can go a long way. It just improves the sound quality. And if you're working in an open office, get a noise canceling headset. Just pay the extra money. If you're really going to work on a remote team and you want to be a pro and you want to have a good remote meeting experience, you got to invest in the equipment to do it. Those spider phones, the ones you have to lean over, like, hey, Bob, it's Lisette. Can you hear me? Like, Bob, you can just chuck those spider phones out the window. In the last 5 years, technology has come a long way, and people don't know how much pain they're in. And so I always tell people, like, just give me a shout, tell me what you're using, and I'll give you a better tool that will improve upon that. Because in the last 5 years, holograms are around the corner. I don't know if you've seen the new Star Trek where they hologram in on the first couple of episodes, but like that is becoming a reality soon. That's for real. So it's exciting times.
That would be a fun meeting. You wouldn't be able to go off and like cook your lunch while the meeting's going on if your hologram's following you around like, oh, whoops.
Exactly. No multitasking allowed. And in fact, I just interviewed a company, Doghead Simulations, and they make virtual reality for remote teams. So they've basically set up equipment and you go into a virtual office, you walk down the hall and go into your meeting room just like you would in an office, and you meet your colleagues there, not as holograms, but in virtual reality. So it's just that people aren't used to it. It sounds really fancy and it's all really new, but it's easier than people think.
Wow. Okay. So get the tech right, get some good headphones, get some decent Wi-Fi. One workaround that Debbie and I have been using, there's this great new tool called Loom. I'll put it in the show notes, Loom.
Oh, yeah.
And when our video isn't rocking, or even if it is, I'll often create videos for her that she can rewatch for specific instructions, and then I'll make a little checklist for her to make sure that communication really got through. And I just attach that all to a Trello card and make sure the the projects are being tracked, and we get to put it in the dump pile and celebrate and that we've actually done work together. So
that's a great idea, in fact. And now in the age of virtual, I would say instead of writing out specifications on tasks, recording videos for people, asking them for what you need is a way better way of doing that.
Yeah, I've actually implemented a lot in my email too. I just noticed for me, obviously I got a podcast. I'm kind of a yacker. I can talk. It's just so much quicker for me to get my words and ideas out via showing somebody my screen and describing exactly, I mean this, but not this, and this, and then this, and this thing is good here too. And then I'll follow up with a little bullet list, like here's the 4 things that I mentioned. Here's any links or resources that I talked about, and boom, here you go. And that email that would have taken me 25 minutes to write, it now takes me about 5. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from coaching clients and just from it's not my new way of introducing people virtually. So if I ever find somebody I want to connect you with, you'll see how this looks. I go to the one person's website or LinkedIn page and be like, here's Lisette. She's a rock star at getting businesses to work more effectively online. And here's my buddy Steven. He's a rock star at moving to freelance work. You guys should meet because of X, Y, Z. And I'll just record the video. And it's almost like I'm kind of standing in the corner of a room at a cocktail party recording that video. And that's kind of a fun way of using video to make the work easier. And I actually think it makes the connections a lot nicer.
For sure. I do an exercise in the workshop where I ask half of the room to write out instructions, and I give them a graphic. And I say, okay, you need to write out the instructions for how to draw this graphic. And then the other half of the room has to take those instructions and draw the graphic. So everybody's partnered up. And I mean, it's a very simple graphic, but nobody gets it right because it's so difficult to let people know via writing what it is exactly that you need. A video would be much better.
Mm-hmm.
Hold up the paper, you can show, this is exactly what I want. So yeah, I always tell people with meetings, online meetings, record your meetings, because that's where online has sort of advantage over in person, is you can actually record your meetings, and then whoever missed the meeting can still look and see what the conversation was like, see if it was heated, how people feel. And in fact, I've watched recordings of meetings and have started speaking up, not realizing that, oh yeah, I'm not actually part of this meeting. So you really feel like you're in it when you're watching it. It's weird. I mean, it sounds like it would be like another layer of Dante's hell to watch an online meeting, because they're already so brutal to begin with, unless you follow the tips that we're giving you in this podcast, of course. But like watching a meeting can be really powerful.
Wow. I'm partway through this book by Ray Dalio. He's a famous investor in Wall Street, and billion-dollar company, Bridgewater. A handful of years ago, he started recording all the meetings and then synthesizing them in little notes so people can go back and look at. And his lawyers were like, I don't know about this. You're recording everything. This could be used as evidence against you. And his point was, hey, if we know we're being recorded, maybe we won't do things that we need to be investigated about. So having that kind of
Love
truthfulness and that honesty, and then maybe if somebody's not on the meeting, it's like, oh man, Lisette's always like behind on her work, and she's bugging me. That's less likely to happen if they know an archive is going on there. So cool.
Or if it does happen, it's important to know, right? Like I would want to know if I'm really bugging somebody, and because maybe it's just most likely it's a simple misunderstanding.
Absolutely. And that's all, I guess, what a lot of times meetings and online work, you need to be hyper aware of communication because you're not in the room with them, so you don't always get all those nonverbal and those just kind of looking and seeing how people are doing things or working that you do in an in-person environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got some tech. Things. You suggest Zoom or Blue Jeans. Big fan of Zoom. Don't know as much about Blue Jeans, but we'll put both of them in the show notes. What are some other basics that people should come in knowing when it comes to facilitating an online meeting? Let's say you're leader of a remote group. I actually have a friend today who's leading a meeting. The potential client's in Hawaii. Another coworker is in California. He's in Austin, Texas. Somebody's in Europe, I think in Germany, and then somebody else is in Australia. So he's got the only reasonable time at 1:00, and everyone else has like terrible, terrible times. So he suggested a resource to me about trying to find good times, unless everyone's just across the globe completely. And he also did a cool thing where instead of having everyone just introduce themselves, he made a slide of like, okay, this is Jake, he's in charge of engineering. This is Sarah, she does social media. So he created the introduction to begin with, just to save a little bit of time. But if you're starting to facilitate a meeting, what are some basics that you should know coming into that besides having some good tools?
I would say I always start my meetings with an icebreaker question. So there's two reasons for that. One is you want to get everybody talking before the meeting starts, because science shows that once somebody has spoken, that they're more likely to speak again later in the meeting. So you want to get everybody just speaking. And the other thing about an icebreaker is it has to be quick too, like favorite food, favorite vacation spot, favorite color, something really quick. Because then you start to get to know something about the person. If it's a meeting where I don't really know anybody, I'll ask, what's the story of your name? Because not everybody has a story behind their name, but like I was named after my mom's best friend. And when there's a story behind something, then you remember the name a little bit more because you have a story behind it. But if you do these meetings over time, you start to realize like, oh, it's not just Bob from engineering. It's Bob from engineering who takes his kids canoeing on the weekend and he loves to go to Hawaii for vacation and his favorite color is blue. Like you start to get a more well-rounded picture of people. So that's really fun. And my tip for virtual icebreakers is don't do anything that's too emotional. Like, no, if you only had 1 year to live, what would you do kind of questions, because things go awry very quickly when you start to get emotional. So keep it light, and favorite food is also good because you learn something about somebody's culture, because food is all about culture. Or favorite holiday, which you can learn about some really fun holidays out there. But keep it light and don't make it emotional because things go weird quickly. I had that happen to me and I was like, never again. I mean, people in tears, I was like, oh my God. This meeting's going totally off the rails here.
I actually had that experience too. I don't remember what the question was, but boy, did we get deep on some stuff. And I was not prepared for it. I wasn't the one who asked the question,
and it can be really awkward.
But I was there to witness some of the answers. Okay, so start things off with an icebreaker because you want some of the people that aren't as inclined to talk to be able to feel more comfortable speaking up. What about those people who, maybe me, don't shut up and they're starting to take over the conversation? What do you suggest for handling that?
Have a special class.
Oh, did you just Elmo me? Oh, come on.
I just Elmoed you. There's a controversy on this card. So this is my Elmo card, and people that are listening can't see it, but it basically, Elmo stands for enough, let's move on. And it's just a card. You can use a sticky note, of course. And it's just a card to indicate, hey, I've heard enough. I get it. I'm ready to move on. Because in every meeting, there's always somebody that goes off on a tangent or they go on too long. They don't shut up. And you want to be able to interrupt them. But verbally interrupting is very difficult, especially if you're shy or introverted. But holding up a card can just be a polite, the judgment's still out on this. One of my colleagues hates the Elmo card, so it definitely has to be something your team agrees on. But I really like it because I know I get overly excited in my workshops and I go on and on and on about a certain tool, like Zoom, for example. And it's good that people Elmo me because then I know, like, okay, they got it. So that would be my, for a facilitator, I would set up some sort of system where somebody can visually indicate that they've had enough.
I like that. I'd be willing to do that on myself too. If I just gave a presentation at a startup on personal Kanban, and I think I probably could have been Elmoed maybe if I'd given people the option, because I was diving really into one topic and I realized, oh man, I've been talking about this one thing for like 6 minutes. Maybe people don't care so much about this particular thing. So I pulled myself back, but maybe somebody might have done that at minute 2 or 3. Like, all right, Zach, we got it. Get on.
Right.
Or maybe even for interviewing folks, if we're getting on tangents like you and I did at the beginning, I'm like, topic. We got a topic. Let's move on from this little mammer jammer. Awesome. So you held up a kind of a fancy looking card, and this is something I can link to in the show notes. What do you call these cards?
I call them collaboration super cards, but they're basically just it's a deck of cards for virtual meetings, and it's got all kinds of things on there. Because for virtual meetings, I guess one of the things I didn't mention in the beginning is I really believe in turning the video on, because I think you lose so much information when we can't see each other. It's just not worth it. So unless your internet connection doesn't allow it, turn the video on. And when you have the video on, you can use these cards to indicate to people like, hey, you're frozen, or probably the most important one is you're on mute. People will mute themselves when they're not speaking. So you can just indicate that they're on mute. And there's a whole bunch of things, like you're breaking up, or sometimes there's a whole group and somebody in the group has a bad background noise and you don't know who it is. So you can just say like, please mute yourselves, while somebody else is talking. So it doesn't verbally interrupt the meeting, of course. And you want to just visually indicate. Or I don't know, sometimes there's somebody like the doorbell will ring and there's a package. And so I'll just hold up a like be right back card so that people know I'll be right back, but like somebody's at the door. So I don't know, I just created this set of cards because I found myself making all kinds of sticky notes all the time and using them all the time. And then my husband said, well, why don't you make a set of cards for yourself? And I was like, great idea. Ding, 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 ding. So if people want them, you can go to the website. And what I'll do is I'll give you a link for your show notes where I've taken the top 8 super cards and put them into a printable PDF so that you can just print them and cut them out yourself. So you don't have to buy the full deck if you don't want to. You can just take the most popular ones.
Perfect. This would have been very helpful because I knew I was talking with you, and so we were talking about online meetings last night. So my buddy Matt was over having dinner with us, so he was talking about his online meeting. And then my fiance has a bi-weekly meeting with a number of teachers. He's a public school teacher in Austin. And this one person made a double mistake. He muted everyone else, so he wasn't even listening to the meeting, and then he unmuted himself. So he was walking around his school talking with other people, but then like fake looking in every once in a while, and somebody had to call him on his phone and be like, dude, we can hear you. You're really ruining this meeting right now. And if everyone had those cards, maybe he could have noticed it a little quicker, like, oh no. So he was just being a bad meeting attendee. What do you do about that? Because it is so easy. Like right now, it might be difficult for me, but I could probably open up Facebook if I wanted to and start looking over there and whatnot on this meeting, especially if we weren't using video. What are some tools to keep engagement high for online meetings and reduce those distractions that people are prone to?
Well, video is probably the biggest thing because you can tell if somebody's not focused on you. You can tell if somebody's multitasking, especially if you wear glasses, because the reflection of the screen, you can see it in the glasses. So you can actually see what people are looking at. So yeah, you ought to be careful about that kind of stuff. But I would say also don't force people to come to your meeting. Like some people don't need to be there. And of course they're going to be multitasking because they don't need to be there. And on the Happy Melly team, what we do is all meetings are non-obligatory. You don't have to go. We try to convince you that it's important enough for you to be there. So when the agenda is set, we try to make the agenda enticing enough that we're going to attract people to come to the meeting because nobody has to go. So I would also say, of course, having a specific agenda so people know what we're going to be talking about is good. And there are always things that come up. And so the facilitator, whoever is facilitating the meeting, needs to make sure that you get through the agenda in the allotted time. So it doesn't have to be the person in charge of the meeting, but always have a facilitator to help make sure you get through the agenda. And if things come up that aren't on the agenda, I call it have a virtual parking lot. So just like say, okay, this is not on the agenda, but we're going to talk about it. We'll put it on the virtual parking lot and then take the last 5 or 10 minutes of the meeting to address those things that weren't actually on the agenda. So people hate online meetings because they're inefficient and they're not productive, of course. So once you've got all the tech set up so that it's pretty seamless, then you need to make sure that the topics are relevant for everybody that's there, and then have somebody who's actually going through to make sure you get through all the topics.
What is the main role of the facilitator? How would that be different than somebody who's participating or even leading the meeting? Is it just like the timekeeper, and how does he do the time? Do you have a card for that? Say, hey, move on. We only have so much time, or?
In fact, there is a card for that. But no, I would say also for the facilitator, it's much more nuanced than that, because the facilitator needs to make sure that everybody who wants to speak up in the meeting does speak up. So when you're using video, you can often see that, you can have meeting etiquette. Somebody can raise their hand, for example, when they want to speak. And the facilitator just needs to make sure that there's not one person or two people dominating the entire conversation. So it's not just keeping time, it's also making sure that every voice gets heard. So I think that's probably the most important thing, because you've got the quiet people who aren't going to push themselves into the conversation, but they have really important things to say. And a facilitator, if you're using video, you can pick up on that by people like taking a breath, and like you can tell if somebody wants to talk, and the facilitator needs to be able to see that and to be able to call them out.
Great. And
there's also a couple of...
I was just going to say, Zoom does that very well by you could put different squares of people. And you could see probably like 16 people relatively effectively on one screen and looking directly at their faces.
Right. It's surprisingly easy to have like a big meeting in Zoom, because you can pretty much see, you really can keep track of about 16, 20 people, no problem, using a tool like Zoom.
What would you say the biggest problem that people struggle with when it comes to having productive, effective online meetings that actually move things forward? Where do people fall down on that?
The first thing that comes to mind when you say that is just having really bad background noise and the horrible tech problems that come with it. If you're spending the first 10 to 15 minutes of your meeting getting the tech set up, you're doing something wrong. Like in an online meeting, you cannot show up at the last minute. Let me back up. In an in-person meeting, you can show up at the last minute, like slide in, sit down, and then be fully engaged. Not in an online meeting. If you show up at the last minute, turn on and expect everything to work, it's not going to happen 100% of the time. Even I have online meetings all day long, and sometimes my headset runs out of battery and there's nothing I can do about it. So I have a spare headset, but I always show up a few minutes before the meeting starts to test my microphone, to test my headset, to make sure everything's working, to make sure that the background is the way that I need it to be. And you can actually make this kind of fun. On the Happy Melly team, what we do is, if you want to build in that personal time and the team building time where you want to just chit chat about like, how was the weekend and what are you working on? We have this unspoken, it's in our team agreement, but we say, if you want to show up 5 to 10 minutes before the meeting starts, just to have that personal time, then people do that. And then the meeting will start directly on time for those that really just need the meeting to start on time. So that's how we build personal time into the meeting. But then we also make sure that the tech works. Because spending that first 10 minutes of the meeting, that sucks. And it's so much money. You've got like all those people in a meeting and then 10 minutes from each of those person's time. And it's frustrating. And by the time, I'm already like on to something else if I'm distracted, if I'm there and I have to wait for somebody else. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. And then the other thing is not following up on the action items from the meeting. Like if I know that whatever we talk about is not going to get any follow-up, I'm probably not going to follow through. So you just have to, there has to be follow-up on the stuff that you decide to do.
Yeah. So would your suggestion be having somebody take the minutes and then at the next meeting being like, okay, we agreed we'd do X, Y, Z. Susan and Sherry and Tom would take care of those things. Where are we at with those? To have some of that accountability, is that a way that you deal with it, or?
That could be, or what we do is we have the action items listed, and then throughout the week, my function on the team is the remote office manager, and my function is to make sure that those action items get followed up on. So I go through, we record everything on Trello, and I go through and I just make sure that those action items get recorded and that they get followed up on. It's sort of my job as the remote office manager to do that.
Oh, that's great.
And people don't, I try not to bug people with it, but they know that that's my function. And I think people appreciate that reminder is there.
Yeah.
Like, hey, the deadline's coming up. Did everybody get this thing done? Because we need to, on Monday, we need to move forward on this task. So if you still have outstanding stuff, like you're holding us back, and nobody wants to be the one that holds the rest of the team back. So
Absolutely. The remote team I was on, we had somebody fill that role. And when we gave them the authority, she had the role, and we said like, okay, let us know if we're getting behind. But we all, as a team, said, Marmel, you have the authority to bug us, to ping us. We know we're not getting things done as effectively or as efficiently as we want to. So bug us. If we're a bottleneck, if there's a piece of our work that's a bottleneck and you see us working on something else, you can ping us on that. And it really helped. It really helped us move a lot more projects to the done pile than before, when we just kind of were pulling in work that we were interested in and not necessarily the work that we'd agreed to do. So cool. That's a valuable role. And if your team is getting a little bit bigger and you find you've got a lot of projects open and not a lot of projects getting done, and you want help limiting that scope, having somebody in charge of herding the cats is definitely
Totally.
something available. Well, as the facilitator, I've already not done a great job of this. We're 2 minutes over the time that I said I'd keep you. Are you okay to answer 3 more questions before we take off?
Totally.
All right, thank you. The last 2 questions I ask everybody is a way to just create an archive of improvement, of Kaizen. So what's a book that's been influential to you and why?
For me, it was Revenue Growth Habit. And this is a book on how to, in 15 minutes a day, how to increase your revenue. So it basically tells you to focus and to choose things like you're not going to sell on social media. You think you're going to sell on social media, but that's not what social media is about. You're going to actually sell by reaching out to your customers and clients and showing the value that you provide. So this book just basically tells you how to show your value and how to actually sell. Because my business grew despite me. Like, I am a horrible entrepreneur. It is not the business that I should be in, but I find myself running a company and I have to sell. And so I had to figure out a way on how to do this. And this book really showed me the way. I mean, I have a whole plan for how I do that. And, it's through newsletters, it's through calling people on the phone, which I hate to do. But, if you run a business, you got to put on your big girl pants and you got to call people on the phone and build relationships with people. And it's also, it tells you how to speak in results-oriented language. So how do you convey what value you're offering to your customer? And I'll give you an example. You'll see all the time, if you go on LinkedIn or social media, you'll always see these like, join my webinar. But who cares about your webinar? Like, what do you care about your webinar and you want people to join, but I don't want to join your webinar, but what do I get from your webinar? That's what you want to convey. After joining my webinar, you will be, a remote meeting pro. Or that's even a bad example, but I think you know what I'm saying. You want to convey the value that your customers are going to get. What's in it for them? That's always what you want to be asking. What is in it for them? They don't care about your webinar. They want to know what they're going to get out of your webinar.
Maybe it'd be having meetings where nobody ends up doing their work. Figure out how to stop that right now. Because that would be a problem. People are like, man, nobody does anything on the meeting. All right, I want to join that, figure that out, and get Lisette, get her rear in gear. Come on. That's great.
Right. It's like when you join my webinar, you're going to run problem-free meetings where everybody contributes. Oh, yeah. That would be way better than join my webinar. Nobody cares about your webinar. Yeah. And also, I know it's so sad. Nobody cares about my webinar, but it's true. But also, people don't care about me. They're not there to see me. They're there to get the knowledge that I have. So stop making it about you. And also, people always start their meetings and webinars with these big introductions about who they are. Nobody cares about who you are until after you've conveyed some knowledge or given some value. Then they care. Wait, who is this person? So yeah, that's the Revenue Growth Habit. It's kind of an annoying book in some ways. I don't know, there's something annoying about it, but the value that you get out of the book, man, that book changed my life. Changed my life, they always say. But it really did.
For people who get a little itchy when they hear the word sales, it's important, though. You got to, I think I heard you quote Jim Collins on another podcast I listened to, you got to put the oxygen tanks on because if you don't have that revenue coming in, you've kind of got a hobby or a stressful stressful something that's not paying you any money. Okay, cool. So that's a book that has really helped you out. Actually, a book that I'm going to put in the show notes as well as read. I've had some people on recently that they haven't gone live on the podcast yet, but that have been talking about how to get into sales habits with referral marketing. So this seems like a good way to add on to that. What about a favorite productivity tool or resource? So we talked about a couple of video conferencing software, Zoom and Blue Jeans. What's a tool or resource you might recommend?
Oh man, for productivity tools and resources, it's so varied for people. I guess what I would say is experiment with what works for you. Like for instance, Toodle-Doo totally works for me. It's a really weird tool, and there's probably way better ones out there, but it's the one I like and it's the one I'm used to. So that's the one I use. So I would say experiment with the tools. But in terms of a productivity tool or resource, I love listening to podcasts. That's where I get my knowledge from, my productivity knowledge from, and all my tips. So there's a million tools out there, and I'll give a shameless plug, but not just because it's a shameless plug, because it's also a really useful resource. But on the Collaboration Superpowers website, if you go to /remote, I've got a whole list of tools there of like online brainstorming, online whiteboards, decision-making tools, all kinds of things. There's like hundreds of tools on that page. And I would say definitely go through those and see what will work for your team. Because if there's one thing that I've learned from all the interviews is there's no one right way to make remote working work. It's a whole bunch of little things that you massage into place. And some things, like for instance, I'm a wiki lover. I love wikis. I love how they work. I love how everything links together. I love the freedom of wikis. And I put together like a whole resource for a team using a wiki, but then nobody used it because nobody else on the team loved wikis or even liked wikis even. So even though it was the perfect tool, it was the perfect resource, if nobody uses it, it's not the perfect resource. So sometimes you'll find the perfect thing, but nobody else in your team cares about it. You just have to move on and find the thing that people care about. So I find out most of my stuff through podcasts. I'm just sort of a podcast junkie, which is why I loved, when you're like, you want to be on my podcast? I'm like, hell yeah, I want to be on your podcast. Heck yeah, I should say. I want to be on your podcast because I think that's where I'm a listener. So that's where I glean most of my information. I will say one thing one podcast I discovered recently, which I'm sure nobody else has mentioned, which is sleeping is an important productivity tool, in my opinion. Getting enough sleep is so important. And I've learned this as I was getting older. And there's a podcast called Sleep With Me, which is a guy that helps put you to sleep. Like he just talks in a voice. His name is Scooter. He just talks in this voice. And sometimes you're like spinning at the end of the day and your brain doesn't turn off. Scooter just gives you something to focus on as you drift off to sleep. And I just love. So maybe that'll be my resource. The Sleep With Me podcast.
Yeah. On a former podcast that got recommended, and I started listening to Scoots, and he's very funny too. In addition to, it's a unique way of falling asleep. My suggestion to you, because we were talking before the air, is turn off those computer screens a little bit earlier, Missy, because the blue light can really it prevents your melatonin from being secreted, and so I've got a curfew for my screens. It's hard to enforce sometimes when you are working remotely. It's easy to open your laptop and just jump into your remote office so quickly. But Lisette, thank you so much for coming on. For people who want to find out more, we'll put all the links in the show notes. And if you're listening to podcasts right now, go ahead and just pop over and check out your podcast. It's Collaboration Superpowers, and enjoy that if you're looking for more productivity and remote working tips. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Able Business Radio. Hopefully it will make your online meetings and remote team work all that much more effective. And Lisette was just a treasure trove of ideas and tools and tips. Just got done writing the show notes. There are a lot of links in there for a lot of different places to explore. So if you're listening to this podcast while driving on the road or working out or some other area where you weren't able to take notes, don't fear. Go to zacharysexton.com/39, and all those links that Lisette and I talked about will be included. There'll be an additional one too. I'm doing a training tomorrow. If you're listening to this on November 1st, it's going to be Thursday, November 2nd. It's 4 simple tips to end overwhelm and beat the burnout. It talks about some of those topics that Lisette and I mentioned at the top about Kanban and about visualizing your work and about Trello, but it's a way of getting control of your work and becoming more reliable without setting up an overly complicated system you won't end up using. So by the end of the hour long, actually it's 40 minutes with a little bit of a Q&A at the very end, workshop, you'll have greater clarity from seeing all the projects that you have in one place, reduce stress by not letting promises fall through the cracks, and improve focus through reduced multitasking and mind wandering. So this meeting is optional. You don't have to come, but hopefully I I sold it enough to where you think it'll be valuable to hop on that call. You can find out more details at zacharysexton.com/Trello training. Ooh, and actually, if you sign up, you get a bonus hour-long Trello tour, essentially is what I'm calling it, where I did a brain dump of everything I know in Trello. And if you want to know all the geeky little hacks, those will be in there. So you can sign up at zacharysexton.com/Trello training, or you can find the link in the show notes at zacharysexton.com/39. Man, 39 episodes. Nice. Hope you had a happy Halloween. Hope you had a lot of trick-or-treaters. We only had a couple, but Morty and Gus were dressed up as dragons, so we got to greet the trick-or-treaters very well, and I hope you have a productive and happy rest of your week. We'll see you next Wednesday.